Alright, let's go. Number 10. Gunung Padang. In the highlands of West Java, Indonesia, on the crest of a hill blanketed in emerald jungle, thousands of dark hexagonal basalt columns lie stacked in geometric arrangements across 5 ascending terraces. The local Sundanese people have known about the site for centuries. They called it Gunung Padang, the Mountain of Light. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists assumed it was a modest megalithic complex built sometime in the first millennium BCE. A regional curiosity, a footnote in the prehistory of Southeast Asia. That assumption is now in pieces. In 2011, a team of Indonesian geologists and archaeologists led by Danny Hillman Natawijaja began a multi-year investigation of Gunung Padang using techniques that had never been applied to the site before. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic tomography, electrical resistivity scans, deep core drilling into the hillside itself. What they found beneath the visible terraces did not resemble a hill at all. It resembled a structure. The scans revealed layered construction phases descending into the bedrock. Buried chambers, internal cavities, geometric voids that do not occur in natural geological formations. The hill, the team concluded, was not a hill. It was a pyramid. A pyramid built in stages, terrace upon terrace, by hands that had stacked basalt columns the way a mason stacks bricks. Then came the carbon dating. Organic material recovered from the deepest core samples returned ages that should not have been possible. The uppermost layers, the visible terraces familiar to villagers and tourists, dated to roughly 3,500 years ago. Acceptable, conventional. But the layers below returned dates of 9,500 years. And the layers below those returned dates approaching 25,000 years. Construction phases predating the end of the last ice age. Construction phases predating agriculture. Construction phases predating, by every conventional measure, the existence of any human society capable of organizing the labor required to quarry, transport, and stack thousands of basalt columns into a deliberate architectural form. The findings were published in 2023 in the journal Archaeological Prospection. The backlash from the international archaeological community was immediate and severe. Critics argued the dated organic material was not associated with construction, but with natural soil deposition. The journal would later issue a retraction notice on procedural grounds. The debate continues, but the core samples remain. The radar scans remain. The hidden chambers remain. And the basalt columns, dark and hexagonal and stacked with intention, remain exactly where someone placed them. But here's where the implications become genuinely impossible to absorb. If even the most conservative of the disputed dates proves accurate, Gunung Padang would be older than every known pyramid on Earth. Older than Giza by 7,000 years. Older than the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. Older than the foundations of Jericho. If the deeper dates hold, the site would predate not just civilization, but the world that civilization emerged from. It would have been built when sea levels were 120 meters lower than today, when saber-toothed cats still walked parts of the Americas, when the human population of the entire planet may have numbered in the low millions. It would mean that someone, somewhere in the jungles of what is now Java, was engineering monumental architecture during an epoch in which our species was supposedly incapable of anything more than scattered subsistence hunting. The mainstream timeline of human development does not have a slot for this. There is no chapter in any standard archaeology textbook that accommodates a 25,000-year-old pyramid. If Gunung Padang is what its excavators believe it is, the history of civilization does not begin where we have been told it begins. The site sits today exactly as it has for millennia. Dark volcanic columns scattered across emerald terraces, tropical mist curling through the stones at dawn. Somewhere beneath the surface, in chambers no living human has ever entered, the answer waits in the dark. Number 9. The Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni. In 1902, Workers digging a cistern for a new housing development on the island of Malta broke through the ceiling of a chamber that had been sealed beneath the limestone for nearly 6,000 years. They were not the first to find it. They were simply the first in living memory. What they had cut into was the roof of a subterranean temple complex, carved directly out of solid stone around 4000 BCE, descending in 3 deliberate levels through the bedrock of a small Mediterranean island that, at the time of construction, supported a population of farmers who supposedly possessed nothing more advanced than polished stone tools. The complex spans over 5,000 square feet of hand-cut chambers, corridors, and ceremonial spaces. There are no quarry marks left behind by metal implements, because the builders had no metal. Every cubic foot of limestone removed from the hypogeum was scraped out using antler picks, flint blades, and stone hammers. The walls were then smoothed to a finish that still reflects torchlight after 60 centuries. Trilithon doorways were carved in imitation of above-ground megalithic architecture, as if the builders were replicating an entire surface temple in negative, hollowing the structure out of the earth instead of stacking it on top. Inside, archaeologists found the disarticulated remains of approximately 7,000 individuals, not buried in graves, stacked, layered through the chambers in a density that suggests the hypogeum functioned not as a tomb in the conventional sense, but as something closer to an ossuary, a processing site, or a ritual destination where the dead of an entire civilization were brought down into the rock to join those who had gone before. Whatever cosmology drove that practice is gone. The bones remain, the walls remain. The meaning does not. On the cream-colored ceilings of certain chambers, red ochre spirals curl across the limestone in patterns that look unsettlingly modern. The pigment was applied wet, by hand, in a darkness that would have required oil lamps or torches whose soot has long since been washed clean from the porous stone. The spirals are not decorative in any way the word usually implies. They are geometric, repetitive, and rendered with the kind of confidence that suggests symbolic literacy. The people who made these marks understood what they meant. We do not. But here's where the discovery becomes genuinely disturbing. On the second level of the hypogeum lies a small rectangular room carved into the limestone wall, no more than 2 meters across at its widest point. It is called the oracle chamber. When a male voice speaks inside it at a particular pitch, the entire complex resonates. The sound does not echo in the conventional sense. It saturates. It seems to emanate from the walls themselves, from the floor, from above and behind the listener simultaneously, as if the rock has begun to speak. In 2014, acoustic researchers measured the resonant frequency of the chamber and arrived at a specific number, 110 Hertz. That frequency is not arbitrary. Studies in neuroacoustics have demonstrated that prolonged exposure to sound at approximately 110 Hertz produces measurable shifts in human brain activity, suppressing activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with language, planning, and self-monitoring, while activating regions associated with emotional processing and mood. The frequency, in effect, alters cognition. It nudges the listening brain towards states that ritual traditions across the world have spent millennia trying to reach through drugs, fasting, drumming, and chant. The implications are staggering. A culture that had not yet invented the wheel, that left no writing, that buried its dead in stacks beneath the limestone of a small island, somehow engineered a chamber tuned to the precise frequency that modifies human consciousness. Whether they arrived at it through trial and error across generations or through some lost body of knowledge we cannot reconstruct, the result is the same. The oracle chamber works. It worked when its builders carved it. It works today when a researcher stands inside it and speaks a single low syllable into the dark and hears the rock answer back from every direction at once. The dead are still down there. The spirals are still on the ceilings. And the frequency, whatever it was meant to summon, is still waiting in the stone. Number 8. Nan Madol, the city the stones flew to. Off the eastern shore of Pompeii, a small volcanic island lost in the vastness of Micronesia, a city sits in the water. Not beside the water, in it. 92 artificial islets rise from a shallow coral reef, separated by canals of turquoise, so clear you can watch reef sharks drift between the walls. The Spanish called it the Venice of the Pacific when they finally encountered it in the 19th century. The local Pohnpeians had another name and another explanation, and theirs is closer to the truth of what the site actually is. They called it the place where the stones flew. The walls of Nan Madol are built from basalt, not quarried blocks. Columns, hexagonal prisms of dark volcanic rock, formed naturally when ancient lava flows cooled and fractured into geometric pillars, the same process that produced the Giant's Causeway in Ireland and the Devil's Postpile in California. The builders of Nan Madol took these columns, some over 20 feet long, some weighing as much as 50 tons, and stacked them in alternating crisscross patterns like cordwood. The walls rise 25 feet above the reef. The foundations descend into the coral and the seabed beneath. The total volume of basalt at the site has been estimated at 750,000 metric tons. That number is the problem. Mainstream archaeology dates the major construction phases of Nan Madol to around 1200 CE, though some of the deeper foundation stones may be considerably older. The civilization that built it, the Saudalur dynasty, ruled Pohnpei for centuries from this stone city in the sea. The history is reasonably well documented in oral tradition. What is not documented, what no one has ever been able to demonstrate, is how they did it. The basalt did not come from the construction site. The columns were quarried from a source on the opposite side of the island, across miles of jungle, mountain ridges, and open ocean. There is no road. There is no evidence of a road. There is no harbor at the quarry capable of staging the transport of objects this size. Pohnpei is small, mountainous, and covered in dense rainforest. The terrain between the quarry and Nan Madol is among the most difficult on the island. Modern engineers have studied the problem. Rafts have been proposed. Floating the columns through the lagoons has been proposed. Rolling them on logs has been proposed. Each proposal collapses against the same wall. A 50-ton basalt column does not float. A raft capable of supporting a 50-ton basalt column across open ocean requires construction techniques the Saudalur did not possess. The logs required for rolling would have to be sourced, shaped, and replaced constantly across miles of unstable ground. And even granting all of that, the columns then had to be lifted, positioned, and stacked 25 feet into the air with hairline precision while standing on a coral reef in shallow water. No one has ever replicated the process. No one has ever come close. The Pohnpeian explanation is older than the archaeological one, and on the island it has never really gone away. The stones, the elders say, were moved by two sorcerer brothers named Olisipa and Olasopa. They sang the basalt into the air. The columns flew across the island and lowered themselves into place on the reef. The city was built by chant, not by hands. Strip away the supernatural framing, and what remains is a culture's honest admission, preserved across centuries, that they do not know how their ancestors did this. Neither do we. The walls are still there, stacked in their impossible crisscross geometry, the canals between them still tidal, the mangroves still pressing in from the edges of the lagoon. Fish move through the openings where doorways used to be. Coral grows on foundations that were laid before Europe knew the Pacific existed. And the basalt, 50 tons at a time, sits exactly where someone, somehow, decided it should sit. The engineers have gone home. The stones have not moved since. Number 7. The underground city of Derinkuyu. In 1963, a man in the Cappadocia region of central Turkey knocked down a wall in the basement of his home and discovered a passage behind it. The passage led to a tunnel. The tunnel led to a chamber. The chamber led to another passage, and another, descending into the bedrock beneath his house in a labyrinth that no one in his village had known existed. What he had stumbled into was an entire city carved downward into the earth, sealed and forgotten for centuries, beneath the homes of people who walked above it every day. Derinkuyu descends 18 stories, approximately 280 feet of vertical excavation cut through volcanic tuff, the soft, compacted ash left behind by Cappadocia's ancient eruptions. The full extent of the complex includes ventilation shafts that still function, wineries with intact pressing stones, stables fitted with tethering rings carved directly into the walls, communal kitchens with soot-stained ceilings, churches with cruciform plans, schoolrooms, granaries, oil presses, and living quarters branching off the main passages in dizzying directions. The city could shelter an estimated 20,000 people along with their livestock and enough food to sustain them for months. The standard dating places initial excavation around 2000 BCE, possibly earlier. The builders, whoever they were, worked the tuff with hand tools, copper picks, stone hammers, wooden wedges. No iron, no machinery, no way to know how long the work took, because the spoil they removed has never been fully accounted for. Estimates suggest the excavation produced hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of debris. Where the spoil went remains unknown. The architecture is what unsettles the archaeologists. The tunnels narrow at strategic points so that only one person can pass at a time, hunched over, defenseless. Massive rolling stone doors, some over a meter in diameter and weighing hundreds of kilograms, were carved to seal individual levels from above. The doors could only be moved from one side. They were designed to be closed against something coming down from the surface. The ventilation shafts were positioned to draw air from openings disguised within the landscape above. The wells were sealed from the lower levels so that the water supply could not be poisoned by anyone occupying the upper floors. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. Every feature of Derinkuyu's architecture suggests it was built to hide its inhabitants from an external threat. Not a passing raid. Not a season of conflict. A threat severe enough to justify carving a city the size of a small modern town into solid rock, deep enough that surface weapons could not reach it, sealed by stones that could only be moved from within. The conventional answer is that the city sheltered early Christians from Roman and later Arab persecution, and there is evidence that Christian communities did use Derinkuyu in the first millennium CE. But the deepest levels predate Christianity by thousands of years. The Christians inherited the city. They did not build it. So the question becomes harder. Who built it, and what were they hiding from? The pattern is consistent. Across Cappadocia, archaeologists have now mapped over 200 underground complexes. Derinkuyu is the largest yet discovered, but it is not isolated. A tunnel, partially excavated, runs for approximately 5 miles between Derinkuyu and the underground city of Göbekli. The implication is that an entire population, possibly tens of thousands of people, spread across a network of connected subterranean refugees, was prepared to live beneath the earth for extended periods, sealed off from a surface that had become uninhabitable for reasons no written record explains. What makes Derinkuyu particularly haunting is its silence. The walls carry no inscriptions identifying the builders. The chambers contain no monuments to a ruler, no temples to a named god from any pantheon we recognize from the Bronze Age. There is only the architecture itself, the candlelit passages of pale orange-brown rock, the soot stains on ceilings where families cooked in the dark, the rolling doors waiting still in their slots, and the unanswerable question carved into the geometry of every defensive choice. Something drove them down there. We do not know what it was. Number 6. Stonehenge. On the chalk grasslands of Salisbury Plain in southern England, A ring of moss-stained stones has stood for over 5,000 years, weathering ice, rain, empire, and tourism, holding a secret that mainstream archaeology still cannot fully account for. Construction began around 3000 BCE and unfolded in phases across more than a millennium. The Neolithic builders who broke the first ground on the site had no wheel. They had no writing. They had no draft animals capable of the work that needed doing. They had stone tools, antler picks, rope, timber, and human muscle. And with those resources, they built a machine. Because that is what Stonehenge is. Not a monument, not a temple in the simple sense. A machine for tracking the sky. The largest stones at the site are sarsens, blocks of silicified sandstone, weighing up to 30 tons each. These were dragged from the Marlborough Downs, roughly 20 miles to the north, hauled across uneven terrain by populations whose total numbers across the region likely amounted to a few thousand individuals. 20 miles with a 30-ton stone is not a logistical challenge. It is a generational project. It requires planning, coordination, food surplus, and a social hierarchy capable of enforcing labor across decades. None of which the Neolithic people of Britain are supposed to have possessed in sophisticated form. Then, there are the bluestones. The smaller inner ring stones, each weighing between 2 and 5 tons, were transported from the Preseli Hills in southwestern Wales. The distance is 150 miles, by sea, by river, by sledge, by raft. By routes still debated by archaeologists who cannot agree on the method but cannot deny the fact. The stones are there. They came from Wales. Someone moved them. The numbers compound. The stones were shaped, dressed, and fitted with mortise and tenon joints carved into solid rock, the kind of woodworking joinery applied to stone that should not appear in the archaeological record for another 2,000 years. The lintels across the top of the trilithons curve subtly to follow the circumference of the outer ring. Each one was cut to fit its specific place. The work is not crude. It is not approximate. It is engineered. And then there is the alignment. Stonehenge is oriented with extraordinary precision to the rising sun on the summer solstice and the setting sun on the winter solstice. On those 2 mornings each year, light pours through the heel stone and travels down the central axis of the monument with a geometric exactness that cannot be coincidence. The builders did not stumble into this orientation. They watched the sky for generations, recorded what they saw without writing, transmitted that knowledge across the lifespans of multiple builders, and then encoded it into 30-ton stones placed within fractions of a degree of where they needed to be. This is astronomy performed by people without paper. It is engineering executed by people without metal. It is architecture conceived by people who left behind no plans, no blueprints, no instructions, only the finished object on the plane. What makes Stonehenge particularly unsettling is how thoroughly it dismantles the assumed timeline of human capability. The standard narrative places sophisticated astronomical observation, large-scale labor coordination, and precision masonry in the era of early civilizations along the Nile, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. Stonehenge predates much of it. While the first city-states of Mesopotamia were still finding their shape, hunter-gatherers and early farmers on a wet island at the edge of the world were tracking solstices with stone calendars accurate to the day. They left no writing. They left no names. They left no record of who designed the machine, who oversaw its construction, or what they believed the sky was telling them. They left only the stones, arranged in concentric circles, casting long shadows across the grass at dawn on the longest day of the year, as they have for 5,000 summers, without fail. The machine still works. The hands that built it have been dust for millennia, and the precision of what they accomplished is a question that no quantity of antler picks can answer. Number 5. Puma Punku, the impossible workshop in the sky. high on the Altiplano of western Bolivia, at an altitude of nearly 13,000 feet, where the air thins to the point that visitors stagger and oxygen-starved laborers should have struggled to swing a hammer, lies a field of scattered stone that has become one of the most contested sites in world archaeology. Puma Punku is part of the larger Tiwanaku complex, the ceremonial heart of a pre-Incan civilization that flourished on the shores of Lake Titicaca. Mainstream archaeology dates its construction to around 536 CE. Some researchers examining weathering patterns and substrata argue it is far older. The debate matters less than what is actually lying on the ground, because what is lying on the ground should not exist. The site is littered with andesite and diorite blocks, cut with a precision that defies the toolkit attributed to its builders. Perfect right angles. Identical grooves running in parallel lines so straight they appear machined. Surfaces planed flat to a tolerance, measured in fractions of a millimeter. Drill holes of consistent diameter spaced at regular intervals along stone faces. Internal channels carved into solid rock with edges so sharp they catch fingernails. The blocks fit together using H-shaped notches that interlock like prehistoric Lego, a modular system suggesting standardized templates and repeatable manufacturing. Not approximation, not skilled stonemasonry. Standardization. Diorite is one of the hardest stones on Earth, ranking between 6 and 7 on the Mohs scale. It cannot be worked with copper. It cannot be worked with bronze. It can barely be worked with modern steel. The official explanation is that the Tiwanaku people shaped these stones using harder stone hammers and abrasive sand, patiently grinding the diorite into form over months or years per block. The result somehow rivals modern CNC machining. Stonework that today would require diamond-tipped tools, hydraulic presses, and computer-guided cutting heads was supposedly achieved by men squatting in thin air with rocks in their hands. Then, there is the matter of weight. Some of the blocks at Puma Punku exceed 130 tons. The quarry that supplied the andesite sits roughly 10 miles away across broken, uneven terrain that climbs and falls in punishing gradients. There is no river to float them on. There were no wheels. There were no draft animals on the continent capable of hauling such mass. The llama, the largest pack animal available to Andean civilizations, can carry approximately 75 pounds. A 130-ton block weighs roughly 260,000 pounds. The arithmetic is not subtle. Whatever moved those stones across that landscape did not move them by means anyone has been able to demonstrate. But here's where the site becomes genuinely impossible. The blocks are not standing where they were placed. They are scattered, strewn across the plateau as if violently thrown. Massive interlocking pieces of a structure that once stood upright now lie tossed and broken, some flipped onto their backs, some buried at angles, some shattered along their length. The official explanation invokes earthquakes. The site sits in a seismically active region, and the Andes are not gentle. But the pattern of destruction at Puma Punku is unusual. Blocks have been moved tens of meters from any plausible original position. The damage suggests a single catastrophic event, not the cumulative slow violence of repeated tremors. Whatever happened here happened quickly, and it happened with force enough to fling 100-ton precision-cut stones across a high-altitude plain. The implications are staggering. A civilization with no written language, no iron, no wheel, no draft animals, and no documented metallurgy capable of working diorite, somehow operated what amounted to an industrial stoneworking facility at 13,000 feet. They standardized their templates. They cut interlocking modules. They transported finished pieces across miles of broken terrain. And then, at some point, the entire operation ended in a violence so complete that the workshop itself was thrown across the landscape and left to weather under the Bolivian sun for 1,000 years or more before anyone returned to ask what had happened. The Tiwanaku people are gone. Their language is gone. Whatever knowledge allowed them to shape diorite into machined modules and move them across a landscape that should have made the work impossible. That knowledge is gone. What remains is the stone. The grooves still parallel. The right angles still perfect. The H-notches still interlocking. Precisely with neighbors, they were separated from a millennium ago. The blocks sit where they fell, scattered like the wreckage of a workshop that built something the official record refuses to acknowledge was ever built at all. Modern engineers can stand on the plateau, measure the tolerances, weigh the stones, calculate the logistics, and arrive at the same conclusion every time. With the tools the builders are supposed to have possessed, none of this should be here. And yet, it is here, lying in the sun, waiting. Number 4, the Great Pyramid of Giza, the impossible object hiding in plain sight. The strangest thing about the Great Pyramid is that we have stopped being strange about it. It sits on the Giza Plateau, photographed 1 billion times, climbed by tourists, reproduced on currency and postcards and corporate logos, reduced through familiarity into something the modern mind files under ancient wonder and moves past. But the moment you stop looking at it as scenery and start looking at it as a construction project, the entire structure begins to behave like a problem that should not have an answer. Built around 2560 BCE during the reign of Khufu, the Great Pyramid contains approximately 2.3 million stone blocks. Each block weighs between 2.5 and 80 tons. The heaviest of them, the granite slabs used in the internal chambers, were quarried at Aswan and transported roughly 500 miles north along the Nile. The limestone casing stones were cut at Tura across the river. The core blocks came from quarries within walking distance of the site. The logistics alone, the sustained mobilization of labor, food, water, transport, and quarrying across decades would strain a modern industrial economy. The numbers defy comprehension. But the tonnage isn't what makes the Great Pyramid impossible. The precision does. The structure is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 0.05 degrees. That is not an approximation. That is not remarkable for its time. That is more precise than the alignment of the Meridian Building in Greenwich, the institution that defined the global standard for longitude in the 19th century. A monument built 45 centuries before the invention of the theodolite, before the magnetic compass had reached the Mediterranean world, before any surviving text describes a method for finding true north to within a fraction of a degree, achieves an alignment that modern surveyors required industrial age instruments to match. The base is level to within less than an inch across 13 acres. Read that sentence again. 13 acres of bedrock, dressed and graded so flat that the variation across the entire footprint of the structure is smaller than the width of a human hand. Modern construction sites with laser levels, GPS positioning, and hydraulic earth movers routinely fail to achieve this tolerance over a single basketball court. The builders of the Great Pyramid achieved it across a surface large enough to hold 10 football fields. And then they built upward. Each course of stone was set with such accuracy that the structure rises 481 feet without the cumulative drift that should be inevitable in a hand-laid monument of this scale. The corners meet at near-perfect right angles. The 4 sides face the cardinal directions. The internal passages descend and ascend at precisely engineered slopes, the grand gallery rising at exactly 26 degrees, the descending corridor matched to the same angle in reverse. Nothing about the geometry is accidental, and the surface that we see today is not the surface the builders left behind. The Great Pyramid was originally encased in polished white Tura limestone, hundreds of thousands of casing stones cut to such tight tolerances that the joints between them were measured in fractions of a millimeter. The mountain we look at now is the bare core. The finished monument was a single, luminous geometric form, smooth enough to function as a mirror, gleaming blindingly in the desert sun and visible from miles away across the Nile Valley. Travelers approaching from the east would have seen a structure that looked less like architecture and more like a piece of the sky brought down and set into the sand. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. Egyptologists have proposed copper chisels, wooden sledges, water-lubricated ramps, and armies of seasonal laborers. The proposals are not unreasonable. They are also insufficient. None of them, individually or in combination, account for the precision. Copper tools dull against granite. Wooden sledges do not deliver 80-ton blocks 500 miles and then position them within the king's chamber to tolerances of millimeters. Seasonal labor does not produce 0.05 degree alignment to true north. The truly disturbing aspect is that the Great Pyramid is the best documented impossible object on Earth, and the documentation does not solve it. We know when it was built. We know roughly who ordered it. We know where the stone came from. We have inventories, worker villages, administrative texts, and still, when modern engineers are asked whether they could replicate the structure today with diesel cranes and laser theodolites and computer modeling, the honest answer is hesitation. The pyramid sits there in the sun, 4,500 years old, more precisely aligned than most cities, and waits for an explanation that has not yet arrived. Number 3. Sacsayhuamán, the wall that engineers cannot build. High above the city of Cusco in the Peruvian Andes, at an altitude of 12,000 feet where the air thins to 2/3 of sea level density, a wall climbs the hillside that has confounded every engineer who has ever stood before it. The structure is called Sacsayhuamán, and its outer terraces stretch for nearly a quarter mile in a zigzag pattern of massive andesite blocks, fitted together with a precision that should not exist in the pre-Columbian world. The Incas occupied the site when the Spanish arrived in 1533, and Inca chroniclers maintained the fortress and used it for ceremonial purposes. But the Incas did not build the lower terraces. The foundational walls predate them. The stonework belongs to a civilization whose name has been lost, whose tools have never been found, and whose methods remain unexplained nearly 5 centuries after Europeans first laid eyes on the structure. The stones are the first impossibility. Some of the blocks composing the lower terraces weigh as much as 200 tons. To translate that figure into something the human mind can grasp, a single block at Sacsayhuamán weighs more than a fully loaded commercial airliner. The quarries from which the andesite was extracted lie miles from the construction site across terrain that includes river valleys and steep mountain slopes. The builders possessed no iron tools. They possessed no wheels. They possessed no draft animals capable of moving such weights. The llamas and alpacas of the Andean highlands can carry approximately 75 pounds. A 200-ton stone exceeds that capacity by a factor of more than 5,000. The fit is the second impossibility. The blocks are not rectangular. They are polygonal, irregular, individually shaped, with some stones displaying more than 12 distinct angles, each angle precisely matched to the angle of the neighboring block. There is no mortar. There has never been mortar. The stones are held in place by their own weight and the perfection of their interlocking geometry. A standard test performed by visitors for over a century involves attempting to slide a sheet of paper into the joints between blocks. The paper does not enter, not at the top, not at the bottom, not at any point along seams that run for meters across surfaces curving in 3 dimensions. The blocks meet rock against rock with tolerances that modern stonemasons measure in fractions of a millimeter. But here's where the conventional explanations fail completely. The accepted account proposes that the builders shaped each stone by hand, using harder stones as hammers, gradually pecking away material until the block matched the contour of its neighbor. This explanation requires that the builders test fit each stone repeatedly against blocks weighing dozens or hundreds of tons, lifting them, lowering them, marking the contact points, removing them again, refining the cut, and repeating the process until the fit was perfect. for a single 200-ton block with 12 mating surfaces. This procedure would require thousands of lift and test cycles. Across an entire wall containing hundreds of such blocks, the labor cost is incomprehensible, and the precision achieved exceeds what is physically possible with stone-on-stone abrasion. Modern engineers have stated openly and repeatedly that they could not replicate Sacsayhuamán, not with cranes, not with computer-guided cutting equipment, not with the full inventory of 21st century construction technology. The combination of block weight, surface irregularity, joint precision, and seismic stability represents a problem that contemporary stonemasonry has no solution for. The walls have survived earthquakes that flattened the Spanish colonial architecture built on top of them. The blocks settle, shift fractionally, and return to position. The structure absorbs ground motion that would shatter modern masonry. It was engineered by people whose names we will never know to outlast empires. At sunset, the andesite turns gold. The rounded edges of the polygonal blocks catch the light and throw long shadows across surfaces that look, from a distance, as if they were poured rather than cut. Tourists run their hands along the joints. The paper test is performed daily by visitors who arrive expecting a ruin and leave confronting an engineering problem that has no answer. The builders are gone, the tools are gone, the wall remains. Number 2, the Yonaguni Monument, the staircase beneath the waves. In 1986, a Japanese dive instructor named Kihachiro Aratake was scouting new waters off the coast of Yonaguni Island, the westernmost point of the Japanese archipelago, when he descended into something that should not have existed at that depth. 25 meters below the surface of the East China Sea, the seafloor gave way to terraces. Right angles, steps cut into the rock with the kind of geometric severity that does not occur in nature without enormous coincidence. Aratake surfaced and reported what he had seen. Within a decade, the site had become the most bitterly contested submerged structure on Earth. The Yonaguni Monument is a massive sandstone formation rising from the seafloor in tiered platforms, its largest face descending roughly 82 feet beneath the ocean surface. The structure features sharp 90-degree angles, what appear to be carved staircases, flat terraces stacked one above the other, and along one face, a weathered protrusion that some researchers have identified as a human face deliberately sculpted into the stone. Schools of hammerhead sharks circle the upper platforms. Green algae carpets the steps. The currents above the site are violent enough to kill inexperienced divers, and the visibility shifts from crystalline to opaque within minutes. The numbers that anchor the controversy are stark. If the formation is artificial, it was carved when it was above water. Sea level data for the region establishes that the rock now submerged at 25 meters last stood on dry land at least 10,000 years ago, during the final millennia of the last ice age. That places its construction before the founding of Jericho, before the first agricultural settlements in Mesopotamia, before the wheel, before metallurgy, before any culture that mainstream archaeology recognizes as capable of large-scale stoneworking. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. Marine geologist Masaki Kimura of the University of the Ryukyus has spent decades diving the site and mapping its features. His surveys have cataloged what he interprets as a carved archway, drainage channels, a stone roadway connecting platforms, and tool marks consistent with deliberate quarrying. Kimura has argued publicly that the monument is the remains of a sunken city, possibly part of a lost Pacific culture that predates every civilization in the conventional timeline. His opposition, led by geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University, has examined the same stone and concluded that the formation is entirely natural. The product of sandstone's tendency to fracture along parallel bedding planes and perpendicular joints, producing the illusion of architecture where only geology exists. Both men have stood on the same terraces. Both men have run their hands across the same 90-degree angles. they have arrived at conclusions that cannot coexist. What makes Yonaguni particularly unsettling is not the resolution of the debate. It is the absence of one. The site has been studied for nearly 4 decades by credentialed researchers from Japan, the United States, and Europe. Sonar maps have been generated. Sediment samples have been pulled. Photographic surveys have documented every visible surface, and the question of whether human hands shaped that stone remains exactly where it began, unanswered, contested, and submerged. The implications cut in both directions. If Schoch is correct, and the monument is natural, then sandstone is capable of producing structures so geometrically convincing that experienced archaeologists mistake them for cities. If Kimura is correct, then a culture sophisticated enough to carve terraces and staircases into bedrock existed on the Pacific Rim during the last ice age, and every textbook description of human civilization's emergence is missing its earliest chapter. There is no comfortable interpretation. One reading expands the strangeness of geology. The other rewrites prehistory. The monument itself does not care which side wins. It continues to sit beneath the East China Sea, its terraces colonized by algae, its angles patrolled by sharks, its carved face, if it is a face, staring out into water that closed over it 10,000 years ago. The divers who descend to it leave with photographs and disagreements. The stone gives up nothing. Whatever it was, whoever stood on it when it was dry, the answer remains 82 feet down in the dark, waiting for an instrument we have not yet built to settle a question we cannot yet answer. Number 1. Göbekli Tepe. In 1994, a Kurdish shepherd tending his flock on a dusty hilltop in southeastern Turkey noticed something strange protruding from the soil. What German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt would begin excavating the following year was not a building. It was not a temple. It was a contradiction. The carbon dates came back at approximately 9,600 BCE. To understand what that number means, you have to hold 3 other numbers beside it. Göbekli Tepe predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It predates the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000 years. It predates the invention of pottery, the invention of writing, and the invention of the wheel. At the moment the first pillar was raised on that Anatolian hilltop, no human being on earth had yet domesticated a single grain of wheat. The plow did not exist. The cooking pot did not exist. The village did not exist. And yet someone built this. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, some standing 18 feet tall, arranged in circular enclosures that resemble stone rooms hollowed into the bedrock. The cream-colored limestone is carved with bas-relief animals, so well preserved that the individual scales on the snakes are still visible 11,600 years later. Foxes mid-leap, vultures with extended wings, scorpions frozen in attack, lions with bared teeth. The carvings are not crude. They are not the tentative scratches of a species learning to represent the world. They are the work of artists who already knew exactly what they were doing. The builders were hunter-gatherers. That is not speculation. That is the consensus. The archaeological layers contain no evidence of agriculture, no evidence of domesticated animals, no evidence of permanent settlement at the scale required to feed a construction workforce. The people who quarried 20-ton pillars from the surrounding limestone, transported them across a hilltop, carved them with intricate menageries, and erected them in deliberate circular arrangements, were, by every measure the discipline recognizes, nomadic foragers chasing wild game across the Fertile Crescent. But here's where the standard model of human development collapses. The accepted sequence, taught in every introductory archaeology course for the better part of a century, runs as follows. Agriculture comes first. Agriculture produces food surplus. Food surplus produces settlement. Settlement produces social hierarchy. Social hierarchy produces organized religion. Organized religion produces monumental architecture. Each stage requires the previous one. Each stage takes thousands of years. Göbekli Tepe reverses the sequence. The monumental architecture came first. The temples preceded the farms. Religion, or something resembling it, did not emerge as a luxury of settled life. It may have been the force that compelled humans to settle in the first place. Some researchers, including Schmidt before his death in 2014, have proposed that the domestication of wheat in this exact region, the einkorn variety whose genetic origin point lies less than 20 miles from Göbekli Tepe, happened because hunter-gatherers needed to feed the workers gathering at the temple. Agriculture was not the cause of civilization. It was a side effect of belief. The implications are staggering. Everything we have assumed about how human societies organize themselves, about what motivates construction at scale, about the relationship between survival and meaning, runs in the wrong direction. The hunter-gatherers who supposedly lacked the social organization for monumental construction built the oldest monumental construction on Earth, and then, around 8000 BCE, deliberately buried it. The entire complex was filled in with soil and rubble by the people who made it. Sealed, hidden, preserved by intention. Less than 5% of the site has been excavated. Ground-penetrating surveys suggest at least 20 more enclosures wait beneath the hill, their pillars still standing in the dark exactly as their builders left them, carved with animals whose meanings died with the last person who understood the language of stone. The foundations of history are not stable. They are a hilltop in Turkey, buried on purpose, waiting. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.